Hi guys, welcome to another BigLipz Podcast. As always, my name is Catherine Reach. Joined with me is my good friend Sam Macaulay Blair. It's basically we started BigLipz Podcast. Just originally started season 1 with us talking about specifically film, and then we've kind of branched off in season 2 to talking about TV. In terms of background, we're two kind of independent filmmakers, former film students. So yeah, we're now on episode 23 of season 2, and this is our last content episode of the series of this year from like the series. And yeah, so this episode we are talking about the new Netflix show Kaleidoscope. Yes, so for those who don't know or haven't watched it, basically, it's just a kind of new show, but one of the main reasons we were talking about it is because it's got this new kind of thing where only the last episode is going to be the same for everyone, like in the kind of viewing and like the viewership. So basically it'll be the episodes, the way the episodes are played is randomised. So basically everyone that watches it will get a different kind of sequence of episodes. So yeah, that's pretty much one of the reasons we discussed it. So we'll talk about that first. So Sam, what were your kind of thoughts on that kind of concept of like randomness and the kind of thought that it's different for everyone that's watching it?
I think it's a great idea. I didn't actually realise until I was very near the end that everyone had the same last episode. I thought that it was I thought the whole thing was randomised.
Just a happy coincidence that we hadn't seen the heist up until that point.
Well, I think that was what kind of tipped me off, was like it was getting I was getting further through it, and I was like, this is weird that the heist hasn't happened. And I think I just like saw some article and clicked on it, and it said about all the episodes, all the orders having white as the last one, and I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's weird because it meant that like the way I was viewing the first few episodes was very different, because I went into the first few episodes thinking, just curious, filmmaking brain on. I was like, would this work as a first episode, and would it also work as a last episode? Because I thought that was every episode would have to do, basically. I thought it would have to work as both an intro and an exit, and I thought that was one of the things that really appealed to me. One of the things I thought was really interesting was that whole idea of like complete randomness, and you could watch it in any order and the show would still work. And that idea got me really excited, because it seems like such an obvious idea that no one's done. I mean, I understand why no one's done it, because it's ridiculously difficult to do. It's difficult as is to make like a great TV show, never mind one in which like the order can be randomized. I mean, you have things that you could cheat. You have things like the Twilight Zone that we've talked about. Shows that are just like standalone adventures, and there's absolutely no like through line, where like you could have any episode would do the first and the last, but they actually have gone for like a serialized story, and attempted to design it in a way that makes sense so that you can watch it. So I guess very long-winded answer to your question is I'm kind of disappointed that they didn't go all in on the idea. I'm disappointed that they were like, either they had that caveat where it was like, okay, we're going to randomize the episodes, but we're going to keep the same last episode for everyone. One other thing that I thought was also kind of disappointing, but I also kind of figured about the same time as like the same last episode, was that I don't think the episodes fully are randomized, and no one knows for sure, but I think there's like different brackets. So there's like the first 2 or 3 episodes, they'll always be the first like 3 episodes that you get. They'll just come in different orders, and then the same with like the middle ones, and then the same with like the end ones, where they'll be like, the order in which you get them, but it'll always be like one of 2 like final episodes that you get, or like second last episodes that you get. So even then they didn't. I mean, that was just one thing that I know. Again, no one really knows for sure, but it seemed like that seemed to be the case from like just like polls and like the sort of slightly informal research that people had done. So yeah, I guess I am disappointed that they've not not really like it's kind of like
they're not like fully committed to what they're trying to do.
Exactly. Yeah, they've cheated quite a bit.
Yeah.
What about you? What were your thoughts?
So basically, like, going in, it was kind of being talked about at work, but the way that it was being talked about was that dependent on the order that you saw it in, kind of presented you with a different story. So I don't know whether that would have been like that you were sympathetic to different characters, to other people, or different things like that. But then when I watched it was just kind of very much like a non-linear narrative, which has been done before in movies, obviously. Done a lot in TV as well. So in that instance, it was similar to you in that I was a little bit disappointed in that I thought it was going to be a bit more kind of. I mean, that would be a lot more difficult to. Yeah. I don't even know how you would achieve it. Do you know what I mean? Like, but I thought that would have made a really interesting kind of thing, and then different people watch it. Different people got different opinions on things.
It would kind of be is it the Kaleidoscope effect? The editing, you know. Speaking as two former film students, you know I'm assuming you've had that lesson before, but it's like you've seen that clip where it's like they show you like I think it's like a bowl of fruit, and then there's an image of a guy, and then it's like a baby, and then it's the same image of the guy, and it's they show you like three different things, and they actually play the same clip of the guy looking at each, and the idea is that, you know, when it's the fruit that you're looking at, you see a sort of hunger in his eyes. You see like you read differently into like the image because of the sequence. I think it's the Kaleidoscope effect. And yeah, the idea is it's kind of like lesson 1 in editing, that, you know, the order, you know, where you put things, the order that you stack things completely changes like the context as to how you see something. So it is possible that would be a TV show where you basically extrapolate that idea. That, like you say, that would be so difficult to do. Because you'd have to have like such a lid on just like how you're manipulating the viewer all the way through, and it would be fascinating to see someone do that, but it would be very, very difficult. So yeah, at least my expectations weren't like that, aren't over there.
Sky high.
Yeah, I mean that's like above sky high. That would be revolutionary.
So yeah, like I did kind of like the idea that there wasn't like a set or a set of a kind of structure going in, because it's not the kind of thing we've seen really before. Like you're saying, unless you're talking about something that you can just kind of jump in random episodes. But yeah,
the
I would
Simpsons
be
did it
interested.
first.
Exactly. Yeah, I feel like it's quite like a fun way, and I feel like a heist story is like a perfect kind of base for it, because heist stories generally are quite like a bit more fun maybe than, and that's a weird way to say it, but do you know what I mean? They're like on the cusp at times of being quite silly.
Yeah. See
and
that
different things like that. Like if you think about like Ocean's 11 and Ocean's 8 and things like that, like it is serious, they're trying to steal all this money, but it's also quite silly. Like the things that they're doing are a bit like kind of Inspector Gadget-esque.
Yeah. I get.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no, that's your friend.
No, I was just like, I feel like a heist story is a good kind of starting place for something like that, because it's something that you can kind of jump in and out of, and I feel like heist is very like there's a lot of exposition because there needs to be a lot of exposition, and it's more kind of one of the stories where you can get away with it because there's like always the main kind of brains behind the operation, and they're explaining it to their little crew along with the audience.
The ragtag group.
Yeah, so I feel like a kind of heist story is a good place to start, because you're not going to get lost even if it's like a non-linear narrative, do you know what I mean? Because each episode is explained, and then you can kind of connect the dots by yourself.
That's interesting, because when I, again, knowing nothing about it before it started, when I kind of saw that it was a heist thing, my first thought was, why would you make it a heist?
Oh yeah.
Just because I thought if you're gonna do non-linear, then in my mind, and to be fair, this is going to sound really weird. I hadn't actually seen that many heist movies. Of all the Ocean's films, the only one I've seen is Ocean's 8, which is like, a very bizarre one to have seen. I enjoyed it as well,
I've only seen Ocean's
but it's
8
just not
and 11. I think they're about the only heist things that I've.
But you have seen like 11 is like the classic one. But despite not having really seen many heist things, my favourite film ever is a heist movie, and obviously that's Inception. So
of course, it's like a heist movie, like on steroids. Though it's like top tier heist movie.
Exactly. But I think maybe partly because of that, and I am obviously very aware of the genre, and it's things like Rick and Morty, obviously like riff on it and stuff, and it's I'm very aware of the tropes and the sort of structure of it. But yeah, in my mind, heist stories are very sort of meticulously structured because you're so carefully, like the way that you're sort of playing the audience and sort of building tension and layering in exposition and all these dynamics and sort of building things. To me, it seemed like such a weird thing to do out of sequence, because it's like, okay, well, now I think, again, thinking when I thought that it was completely random, I was like, well, why would you structure it around an event? Because then it's always going to be before or after or the event that you're watching, so there's a natural structure to it. Whereas I guess I'd thought, but I guess, in my head I was kind of like, I also didn't know when I started it if it was like a serialized thing or if it was more individual. And I guess, like you say, like the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I could see how in my head I could think of ways that you could make it work, with it being like a heist. I guess I'd kind of thought I'd thought at first that they might go for like, each episode will focus on maybe like a different character, but it would also jump about time, and you would have like effectively that character would get an arc within their episode.
Like each specific episode would follow like the one kind of character, and it would jump from them before, during, and after the heist or whatever.
Exactly, yeah. They would effectively get a narrative of their own within their episodes, and but they would also they would obviously have a role to play in the heist, and so you would effectively get these like jigsaw pieces where you would find out how, if they succeeded or if they didn't succeed, you'd find out how the heist was done at the and you could play around with it. You could, because some of the characters could be successful in what they do, other ones could not be, and and that way you could. And I thought, okay, well, if every episode was going to serve as an opening and a closing, it'd be really interesting, because I thought what you would end up with is a story. You could again, if you were really going to play with it and have fun with it, do something where every episode doesn't end tonally the same. You have episodes that end on a real downer. You have episodes that end on a real high. Some characters win, some characters lose, and as a result, depending on what episode you do get first and what episode you do get last, it would change how you kind of felt about the show at the end. Either it would be like, okay, that was, the characters I was rooting for won and it was good, or maybe you end up your last episode ends up being like the real downer, bleak episode, and you're just like, okay, that was, it would have been interesting for people to have a different emotional experience, and you're just understanding how all these pieces, nothing, it doesn't fully make sense until you have every piece of the puzzle, basically. But again, very, very difficult to do.
Yeah, very true. I feel like though, I know you were saying that there was kind of issues with it, but I feel like from a purely kind of trying to make the show a success kind of idea, having the heist as the final episode is such an easy way to get people to keep watching and to watch the entire thing. Because as well, it gets to a certain point, you've invested all this time where you're like, now I need to see the heist. So yeah, I feel like generally, I mean, we've spoken about how high my hopes were for it, but I think generally speaking, my expectation going in was slightly more than the show delivered. Would you agree with that, or would you say it did a good job?
I mean, from all the stuff that I was saying already, I think there's the potential of the idea is so high, and I think the actual show itself just was a lot less. It was a lot less inspired than I thought it was going to be. For such a novel idea, it just felt very. It did just kind of feel very like this is just another heist show. And this might be jumping ahead slightly to say, but like watching it, it did just feel like watching a show and with the episodes in random orders. It didn't, to me, feel like I was watching a story that worked in any order. It just kind of felt like, oh yeah, I just watched those episodes out of order.
Yeah, just by happenstance, like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like, do you know how when you're trying to catch something as it's playing on the TV, like if you would like miss a week and then you would manage to find it on catch up, that's very much kind of what it felt like.
Exactly. There's all these shows I'm sure that people have in their lives. Or, you know, we talked about TV before and live TV being on. I'm sure where you've gone in and you've seen like an episode here and there of random TV shows, and maybe it's been years later you've actually watched the whole thing and you're like, oh okay, now I have like a complete picture in my head.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Just on that thread, what order did you watch yours in? Like, or what order did it give you to watch them in?
The order I got was black, yellow, green, blue, orange, violet, red, pink, and white. What was yours?
Sam. Black, yellow, green, blue, orange, violet, red, pink, and then white.
See, this is why, because I'd asked you before we watched it if you wanted to pick an order or if you wanted to let Netflix decide, because I had this paranoia that this exact thing was going to happen. I was like, surely not. At first, when I thought it was more random, I was like, surely that won't happen. But then when I was especially reading that, like,
that's amazing. That's like not even one episode out of order.
I know, literally, like that's winning the lottery right there.
And we watched it different times in different countries.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
literally.
wow.
On different, that's insane.
That's amazing. I wonder though then if you I felt like it wasn't until like maybe 6 episodes in that we got any kind of any kind of insight into after the heist. So we had to watch, like I've written down here, we had to watch 6 weeks before, 7 years before, 5 days before, 3 weeks before, 24 years before, and then finally we got to the morning after, which was red. And I feel like by that point I was getting a bit like, right guys, have you forgotten that this is a heist show? Like, I just want to see some heist or some after heist action. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. See, I didn't even. I think I thought there'd be one episode after the heist, but I didn't. You know, maybe one episode after the heist. I didn't think there'd be 2. So I had this really weird thing where I was watching it and it was like I still thought there was more pre-heist stuff to come, and then when I got to like Pink, you know, the second last episode, and it was like however long that episode is after the heist, I was like, oh, okay, I guess I've seen all the pre-heist stuff.
Yeah.
Which was just again like a really weird just experience to have, where okay, that whole timeline, which is the biggest timeline that you've got, is just done, and I hadn't even realised.
That's so true, because after that point, that's it. We don't go back to before the heist. We just go
exactly. Yeah,
we're just after the heist, and then it's the heist. Yeah. I can't believe we had the same structure. That's hilarious.
I know, that is nuts, to be fair. So much for I guess it like proves the point of like it not being so random.
Yeah, that's so funny. I would love to hear what other people's. I can't imagine people who were watching it just generally for enjoyment would write down the order though, in fairness, so it would be difficult to find out.
Well, I think there's a lot of people online who've talked about it, just because that's like obviously the whole draw of the show, and there's people who've watched it several times in like completely different orders and stuff, and there's like articles that are like, here are like the most like the article will always be titled the best order to watch the show in, and then it will give you like 5 or 6 different orders, and I'm pretty sure they always include the person who wrote the article's personal order that they got as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so we've kind of, like you said, we've kind of touched on it before, so what were your kind of overall thoughts on the show as a whole concept, and then like how it delivered?
Again, I thought like such a great concept, like just the idea of doing like a show out of sequence, and it's so. I was almost like impressed at how like vanilla the whole thing was, and how just like it just felt really kind of lackluster and really just felt like a generic show, and it
yeah.
almost felt like a generic show where they'd been like, right, we need to do something to get people like to salvage this. So we're just gonna, hey, you can watch it in any episodes in any order. That's not how the show works.
Except the last one.
Yeah, that has to be the same. Yeah, it kind of just, that was kind of the feel for me. It just really didn't. I really wanted to like it a lot more than I did. And the random order thing only ended up hurting it, because it just made it harder to connect with the show, and you lost that through line because you were just constantly being like, right, where am I going to be this week? Oh, okay, I'm like, and because I didn't know. I think if I'd known beforehand what, like, if it had outlined, okay, there's going to be one episode is going to be this far before the heist, one of them is going to be this far after. I think if I'd maybe known that, it maybe would have helped a little bit, because it would have given me some intrigue where I'd have been like, oh, well, there's going to be an episode that's like 24 years before, so I'm interested to see what they. But actually, just being surprised every episode by like how close or how far, it just made it really hard to tell. Like, I think there was one where it's like 5 days before the heist, and it's like, okay, is that as close to the heist as we're going to get before the heist, or are there going to be another 2 episodes in there? Like, I had no way of knowing. Like, so it made it really hard to be able to just to feel out the sort of distance and scope, and to get, I guess, like, to know what questions you're supposed to ask sometimes. But yeah, I just kind of thought, like, it just didn't feel very well written, and even down to like the sort of like, I guess if you went with Pink, because the Pink's like the timeline, the end of the timeline, it just felt quite cheap, and it just seemed to be like, we're just gonna kill everyone. It just felt like a very easy way to, like, to tidy everything up, a very lazy way to tidy everything up, because it just I didn't really feel that satisfying. And again, I thought they were going to go for this, because you can have characters, you can have watch an episode where a character dies, and then you're watching the next episode and they're alive again, and that can work because you can put in, you can use dramatic irony, and you can layer in a lot of like foreshadowing, and have moments that maybe like land in a different way when you know how this character like ultimately dies. But it didn't feel like they were doing that. It just kind of felt like they massacred everyone in the one episode because they didn't really know how to sort of tidy things up, and they couldn't really tidy things up satisfyingly in a show that is like randomized its order. So yeah, those are broadly my thoughts. What about you?
I think generally, like, the way that I would describe it is that it was okay at best. Like, like you were saying, it just felt, there was something just off about it for me. It just felt like it wasn't a particularly good show. There was points, there was elements in it that were just really ridiculous. Like, do you know how I said before about heist movies, how they're a little bit silly? There was like at one point in the heist where they, I'm pretty sure they mentioned it in very briefly in passing in one episode, but then they just hit out with these hundreds of thousands of bees.
I knew I knew it was gonna be the bees. I had the same reaction, and I think as well, like, because I just increasingly found myself not caring about the show. I think mentally, like, I just wasn't really absorbing information in the same way, because it just wasn't. It didn't feel like the sort of show where you actually. I thought it was going to be super engaging, and it was like, okay, I'm going to be paying attention to everything because I'm going to be trying to piece things together, and I just didn't.
Yeah, because it's a lot more fun that way, like. Yeah, like I'm just gonna mention this because I watched it like literally the other day. But the second Knives Out film, when you were watching it, there was little snippets, and you were rewarded for paying attention on that movie. Sorry, but I feel like with the show, you weren't really awarded.
No, exactly.
Much because
exactly,
it wasn't. They didn't have much to give.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like Knives Out and Glass Onion are both very good examples of, like, they do a really good job of play, non-linear, and playing around with, like, knowing how to sort of, and again, that's very deliberately structured and stuff, but it does have all these little, like, red herrings and little hints, and it does the way that it makes you kind of like try and pay attention, try and like get ahead of it, but it's always kind of ahead of you. And it would have been like way more fun to have that kind of thing, and they did kind of have stuff like that in there, but it all just kind of felt like there wasn't tons of it, and what was there kind of felt a bit like shallow, and it felt like the show didn't really trust its audience to be able to Like it kind of felt like they didn't trust the audience to be able to understand the fact that the episodes were coming out of order and be able to follow what was going on, but it also didn't feel like it did a very good job of like designing its episodes to work in any order. And yeah, I think like the bees thing, when it happened, I was just like, okay, there's bees. I probably missed a line somewhere where that was like set up. I was also very surprised because I was like, I don't remember the bee episode, and I feel like, why was not a bee episode? But they could have had a whole. Did they have a whole thing where someone did have a car with bees in it, didn't they?
Yeah, and I remember the whole like that the guy Stan, his whole thing is that he can get anything, but like I feel like that more than the explosives and the chemicals that they used. I'm like, where did you get all those bees? Like, and
exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
And
that's
the whole,
another way.
Him walking through. Sorry.
I was just gonna say that's another way they could have taken it, where they could have done. You have the heist as one episode, but the way that it works, the way that it works as a standalone episode, and you'd still have interest in watching the other ones, is you could have like the other episodes again explain who these people are and how they're able to do. You could have things like the bees, and you're watching. If it's the first episode is the heist episode, you're like, okay, what are the bees about? Where did they get this? Who are these people? But then you could have like a bee heist episode where they have to get 1,000,000 bees.
Yeah, that would be funny.
And then because they do have like the pre-heist heist thing that they do, but you could do more of that sort of thing where it's they have to get these individual things. They have to do these individual things to make the heist possible. So even if you had the heist first, you're still interested in watching it because you're like, okay, but how did they actually? What did all these elements mean and come from, and how did that make any sense?
Yeah, I feel like as well, just from a purely like screenwritery point of view, they spend. I discovered this through Google that the collective name for a group of butterflies is called a kaleidoscope, and
oh wow,
they're always hitting out hard. Each episode they mention butterflies or something. Especially one of the characters, Judy. People are always giving her butterfly gifts. So just that way, as I was watching, I was like, why didn't you use butterflies for that sequence? Because they could flutter about surely and thingy the sensor the same way, and it would make slightly more sense than the bees.
Yeah.
But whatever. It must have been harder to get a hold of butterflies than bees. But yeah, one thing I wanted to say as well is that I feel like maybe a heist story isn't suited to 7 or 8 hours worth of content, because it was getting really taxing at one point and especially because there was so much pre-heist, and not even a lot of that was the planning of the heist. It was very much like, oh, this is where Ray or Leo or whatever, this is what he was thinking 20 years ago. This is what he was thinking 5 days ago. Like,
yeah, you're right. Yeah, for a show that does a lot of pre-heist stuff, you're right. It's not very much about like, and again, it's because they can't really do it that way because of the way they've designed the show. But yeah, there's not a lot of like, okay, well, we're going to set up stuff for the heist, and as a result, it just kind of felt like they just kept talking about the fact that they were going to do this heist. And I do remember kind of thinking like, okay, you just do the heist. Can we just see you do the heist? Like, we don't need any more of this like incessant bickering and. Yeah. And the character of Bob just being like very poorly written. Like, a lot of the characters were poorly written, but him especially. Like, no, people generally don't behave like that. I know, and the weirdest thing about that was the fact that like he wasn't even supposed to be part of it, and very quickly made himself like effectively redundant, and it was just so weird that he was just like this absolute wild card, horrible to everyone, like a complete liability,
including his wife.
Yeah, exactly. And I just every single time I was like, what is when are we like? I kept thinking, I was like, are we gonna get some episode that kind of makes sense of this? And you just don't. He just is this. It felt like the writers thought, okay, well, we're gonna have him be like, he's like really chaotic and stuff, and just says what's on his mind and does what he wants, and viewers are really gonna like gravitate to that because he's just this really entertaining presence. But really, you're just like so unlikable.
Yeah, 100%. And like, even if you were the kind of mastermind of that heist, fair enough, you need someone who can blow things up. But I'm sure if you are a criminal who knows other criminals, you know other people who can blow stuff up. Do you know what I mean? And she didn't even do it right in the end. Do you know what I mean?
I know. exactly. Yeah, it felt like the flimsiest reason to get him on board.
Yeah.
But then it really, really tests the resolve of like why would you keep him around? Like it has you
Exactly.
asking that question over and over again, and they give you such a flimsy reason. It's so weird.
Yeah.
Another thing I thought was really weird was it Leo or Ray or both, and how they obviously like explain that he's apparently dead. He faked his death, but once they start getting the attention of the feds and everything, once they start getting, he doesn't really seem to make that much of an effort to hide. In fact, he actively hangs around outside, the place that they're going to rob, which, obviously the guy that works there was like his former best friend and colleague.
Yeah, I thought that about his daughter as well. Like, she was old enough at the time to remember. Like, what age would she been? Like, at least, 7?
Yeah.
Like, I can remember people from when I was 7. Do you know what I mean? Even
yeah, you're probably not going to forget. Yeah, exactly. You're not going to forget your dad's best friend who you had, like, multiple meaningful interactions with. And, yeah, he was around all the time and stuff and probably was a big part of you growing up.
Exactly. Yeah, but that's such a good point. Like, it was very, like, it definitely felt like, writing wise, it felt almost like a little bit lazy. Like, this is what we want to happen, so this is what's happening.
Yeah.
Like, there's no kind of consequence. And then just very quickly, I'm going off on a tangent a little bit, but I really disliked the FBI agent and how she slotted right into that horrible trope of like, just like annoying, bossy, like professional women. Do you know what I mean? Not to get into like that kind of discourse, but like she was like the worst kind of character, and it felt so lazy because it's such like a cliche. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like people aren't like that. People aren't even writing people like that anymore. Do you know what I mean?
I know. It also felt like they went out of their way to make her like unlikable, and like even just the whole thing about like they have her have like friction with one of the characters, is Ava Mercer, because she calls out the fact she mentions drugs, and she's like, what's that supposed to mean? It's like and then when she's like talking about it later on, she was like, yeah, she like filed a report because I was like using, and she's like, I was using, but that's kind of beside the point. And I was like, why did you bring this up? Like, what a weird thing to just like, and like come clean about, but what a weird way to do it as well. Like, surely your approach to that conversation would be like, okay, so just so you're aware, I had this troubled point in my past, and she was part of that as well. So why, I don't know why she was like, she did it in such a defensive way where she was like, yeah, she accused me of this thing and she was right, but still it was so odd.
How dare she do that?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. The more I talk about it, the more I'm like, do you know what? not my favourite thing I've watched this year.
No, I know, and it's very early on in the year as well.
Exactly. So, obviously, as again we've kind of touched on this before, but I wanted to talk kind of specifically about the idea of like the non-linear narrative, and how, and its effectiveness or ineffectiveness in this case. Do you think there's a way that it could have, like you've kind of mentioned it before, but could have been done better, or would it have been better just to completely ditch the non-linear aspect of it?
I think non-linear makes sense when you're doing a story sequence and stuff, because non-linear storytelling is obviously a thing, and it's I like non-linear storytelling. I think it's very interesting, but non-linear storytelling is usually very carefully structured. It's usually it's non-linear. The reason it gets away with being non-linear is because like there are very, very like specific points that things are set up, and flashbacks happen or flash forwards happen. So doing it out of sequence also then just, I guess, it makes it hard. But I think it totally could have worked. I think it would have helped the show. I do think it would have helped the show if there was a more clearer, if you were just clearer in the pattern from the outset. Like, I think if you knew, maybe if instead of having all these like, if there'd been like an even structure to when events were happening, like some kind of like pattern, so that you could tell, you just had some sense of like, okay, well, I'm watching one of the 2 episodes that take place after the heist. I'm watching one of the 5 episodes. I think it would have just, I think you just kind of needed a way to orient yourself in terms of like where everyone was, and just exactly how lost or how not lost you should be. That to me, that was just something I felt I needed, or I felt like would have helped me when I was watching it, because as it was, it just felt really sort of random and really like, and now we're going 24 years in the past, and now we're going like 3 days before the heist, and it just didn't really work, because it made it really hard to also know, to just remember what everyone's relationship to each other was at that point, and who knew each other, and had this thing happened yet, or was this still to happen? It made it really hard to keep track of, like, to me anyway, like when things were happening and when things had happened or hadn't happened. What about yourself? Yeah,
I think that's a really good point. I would definitely agree that there were points, like you're saying, where you're like you're saying, we've watched enough like non-linear things before, and like non-linear stories that are much more complicated, but they kind of, once they come together, it feels a lot more satisfying, whereas this just, and I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head, where you're like, it needed to be structured more than it was, which sounds counterproductive when you're talking about like non-linear narratives, but yeah, and it needed to have something to, I mean, clearly it did, since we had this exactly the same structure, but it needed to have something a bit more structured about it.
Yeah.
Or it needed to go completely in the opposite direction, where it was completely random. But yeah, I just feel like it fell short of kind of what it promised me, and the thing that I made up in my head. So yeah, basically, I feel like pretty much like what you were saying, that it just didn't. Yeah, it was just missing something. I feel like as well, had the story panned out kind of just completely linearly.
I'm not going to attempt to try and say that.
Yes, like in the order of events chronologically, because obviously I mentioned before, like one of my issues with it is that there was so much kind of like before the heist, that had it played out chronologically, it would have, like, I already found it boring, and I had it, the only kind of thing that was making it a little bit more exciting was that it was jumping through different times. So I feel like if it had played out chronologically, it would just really have been, for me anyway, pretty boring. I feel like as well, like you were saying, the times seem so random. Like, like, fair enough, the 27 years or however long it was before made sense, because that was where the kind of story began. But then there was random, like, 5 days before. I have so little recollection of that episode, because I feel like I don't care what happened 5 days before. I think that was one of the ones where they kept discovering all these issues, like, oh, the back door that I put in's been closed, but then it was completely resolved. Like, I don't remember there being any resolution, except maybe Ray or Leo being like, yeah, it's fine now, don't worry about it.
I know, and I wonder if that's a good point, actually. I wonder if there are like little things like that aren't resolved and don't really make that much sense, but you just don't really notice it because you're just trying to make sense of like the order. Yeah. And I was the same with, like, because I think there's like one that's like a few weeks before the heist, and there's the 5 days one, and again, it's just like when you don't know, like, if you knew that that's 5 days before it is the closest to the heist without it being the heist that you're going to get, it makes it more interesting. Yeah. But yeah, when there's problems occurring like that, you're like, okay, well, there might be multiple episodes for them to solve that. Like, how worried should I be?
Surely if that was the day before the heist, that would have been, the stakes would have been a lot higher, because within 5 days you've got enough time. I assume, I don't know, I haven't tried to break into a secret vault before, but that you know of. But I assume that within those 5 days you could suss something out. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. It just lowers the stakes, and it just made it hard for me to be as worried when, like, you just don't know anything that's going to go wrong 5 days before. I'm like, well, we've got 5 days, and in any normal like movie or show, 5 days is like, that's like 5 episodes that you've got to fix this.
Even in like real life, if an issue came up that was still 5 days away, I wouldn't even be worried.
Yeah.
I'd be like, I'll be fine.
Exactly. Yeah, you got so much time. That's a working week you've got.
Exactly. Like Leo, Leo wasn't the one that was concerned, but he knows. He's like 5 days.
Yeah. I said I'm gonna take a few days to myself, and then I'll deal with this.
Exactly. Yeah. So kind of moving on from that, obviously the episodes' names were different colours, and obviously the name of the show is Kaleidoscope, and everyone you look into Kaleidoscope, it's all the different colours. So, I wanted to know your thoughts on the kind of use of colour in each episode. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that, and I'll let it be up to your interpretation of the question. So, because I'm sure you have some thoughts, and I'm sure some of your thoughts are very similar to mine.
I think. I mean, we've worked on things together before. Obviously, we've done short films and stuff, and color theory is always something that I'm really interested in. Like, I love the way that you can use color in films and in media, in visual media, and visual storytelling, and the sort of symbolism of it, and the ways in which that you can. Yeah, I've sung this show's praises a million times before, but I can't not bring up Better Call Saul. I watched a fantastic video essay on it just after it wrapped up. And it talked about just the ways in which it uses colour symbolism and the ways in which it uses it, because it also talked about Breaking Bad and the way that uses colour symbolism. But the two shows actually do very different things with it. With Breaking Bad, the thing which works, which is very like thematically relevant to the show, is it kind of has like a sort of everyone's in like a state of decay. So you have like all these colours go from like sort of bright to really sort of like dark versions of themselves, because the show is all about decay, like and Better Call Saul is a very different thing, and again it makes more sense with like the legal framework. So that is colour theory done like so cleverly, and with so much consideration. And with Kaleidoscope, it just kind of felt like the episode, like if it almost felt like a joke at the end of every episode when it would like zoom in on like a coloured object, and it would be like, just so in case you forgot, this was the green episode.
Yep.
And I was every time I was like, why would you could have done something with that like throughout the episodes, like.
Yep.
It
Instead,
just felt
they tended a lot towards like women's coats for some
yeah.
Like, this is the Violet episode, so here's a bright purple coat. Like,
and it just even like the pink episode, and then he's got like but sometimes like the pink episode he has like the bright pink headphones, and it felt like some of the episodes it was like they were halfway through making it and they were like, oh fuck, it's the pink episode, right? buy pink headphones, we'll use that. It just didn't feel like, again, you could even have done like, it just feels like you could have done, there's so much you could have done in terms of like emotional significance and narrative significance and what these colours all mean. And I listened to a quick like video earlier on that talked about like someone trying to like analyse and understand. They liked the show a lot more than we did. Analyse and understand the different colours and what it could all like symbolise and how they could all like relate. And I just, even listening to that video, I kind of like checked out a little bit. But also it just like, some of it I was like, it either felt really shallow or like they were really reaching. It very much felt like that English teacher, version of like reading something where it just, you're just like
it's
the
a bit curtains are blue.
yeah, it just kind of felt like contrived and it didn't feel it just, again, like it's such an interesting idea to build every episode around a colour, and again it's just like, why have you done nothing with this?
Yeah, like that's where subtlety really needs to be. Like, it sounds counterproductive to say front and centre, but do you know what I mean? Like, subtlety was the key there, and these episodes where there was nothing subtle about them. No. I feel like one of the things I wanted to say was pretty much exactly what you said. They're so, like, in terms of like a coding and things like that, there's so much that you could have done with colour. So like, for example, there's like green could be for jealousy, and that could be what the episode revolves around, people being jealous that other people, like the whole kind of weird love triangle thing, that would be a prime place for the jealousy episode. And then there's like blue is meant to be quite calming, purple historically I think is meant to signify like madness and things like that, so that would be perfect for Bob. So yeah, I feel like that would have been so much more interesting to watch. It would have been a lot more clever as well, and a lot more like nuanced and things. Like it was very much like you're saying, it felt quite like first year film student-esque. Do you know what I mean? Like we'll just, oh yeah, that looks really cool. If this episode's called Pink, we'll put something pink in the background. So yeah, I feel like there was a lot of scope for it, again, like everything else in the show, there's a lot of scope for it to be really interesting, but it felt almost like a kind of, exactly like you were saying, like an afterthought.
Yeah.
Like they'd named the episodes colours because they thought that was cool, and then they were like, oh, someone somewhere in the art department was like, oh, maybe we should put something red in.
That's what I mean. Like it just feels like all the best ideas this show had it feels like they were had really late on to production.
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't feel like these were like part of the genesis, but rather like they were like almost, you know, like midway through shooting, and they were like, actually, hang on, let's do this. And it's impressive to see a show have so many good ideas and do so little with them.
Yep, 100%. And yeah, that was kind of one thing that really annoyed me about the show, possibly more than the structure and the narrative and things, because I was like, it just felt so lazy. Like there's so much you could do with color. Even like each episode could have a different like color grade and things like that. Do you know what I mean? Like visually, it could look like a pink episode or a green episode. Do you know what I mean? And then you could go from that. You could work off that with like the kind of tone and the
that's another way of doing it as well. Yeah, you could basically have like a different genre for every episode. You know, you talked about like green being like jealousy, but you also have green being like money and stuff, and that you could even build in like, okay, that's the one that explains sort of what they're trying to get, and you know the whole thing of like the bonds and all that. That would be like your episode that explains who the triplets are and what the money is and what all the characters are going to do with it. And then, you know, you have like a Red episode, and that could be, you know, characters die in that episode, but also Red's passion and love, and you could find out why Judy and Bob are together and what was going on there, and yeah, like you could make it you could totally make it like the theme, and or even like, you know, you make it maybe one of the episodes is a lot more comedic, and you know, one of them is again the blue one being like the really downbeat episodes. All these ways, like you say, of like actually taking that idea and really doing something interesting with it that still works perfectly within what they're going for, with like the non-linear, the non-connect, or the sequence episode structure. Yeah,
it was definitely like sorry, I've completely forgotten my point, but I think there was, as we said, so much more scope for it to be just done better. Like, do you know what I mean? So if you have one, moving on, what would you say was your favourite episode?
I think the ones I like the most were green, pink, and white. I think green, especially because that was like the second one I saw. So back in the days when I had hope, and I had a bit more faith in the show. And yeah, it just, you know, I guess because it was also like, you know, it's like a Prison Break episode, and you were getting some answers as to like these characters' backstories, how they knew each other, and the whole like, there was some fun moments in it and stuff, which I kind of appreciated. I did, and again, I did still have questions that I felt like should have been answered in that episode when watching it. That might have been partly to do with me not like even then not paying like as much attention as I should have. But why was Stan in jail?
Pass. Was that explained? I don't know.
I kept waiting for that one.
I wasn't listening.
Yeah, I think it was maybe explained like really quickly, but I think given how much exposition we get on why Ray's in prison, it just kind of felt like, what did and what's and How did Stan get out again? Did he just
He
serve
just
a
had
sentence?
he only had like 6 months left or something.
Oh, that was
no,
it,
did
yeah.
he? Yeah, and then he was going to escape, and then he didn't.
How long had he been in there?
Who knows? And why was because he had that whole like weird kind of thing with Judy that you discover later on isn't even really a thing. But he'd been acting like he'd been in there for years at that point, and that she was sticking by him. Like the whole thing was very weird.
It was very strange, but that was one of the better ones. Just because it did feel like, I think again it kind of worked because it was kind of doing a contained thing, where it almost had like a story that it was telling, but it was also it was almost like by accident it was also fleshing out the characters' backstories and their sort of dynamics, and also kind of like telling you the roles and their capabilities and stuff like that. And that's again what it felt like it should have been doing more of. These like standalone sort of stories that worked as individual episodes, but also are fleshing out the characters, and you then kind of know, you then understand characters' dynamics, and you understand maybe it was something you were aware of, that these characters had been in prison together. Maybe it's something that like is a reveal, and it could have been done. I'm just going back into the all the things that could have done with it. The other episode I liked was I think the pink one, because I knew when I was watching the episode, because it's the second last one I was watching, I knew that was like, okay, well, this is the end, like, in terms of like the chronology, this is the end point that I'm watching. So that made it interesting, because I was like, well, whatever happens to these characters is what happens to these characters, and that it's cool. It then made it interesting in the sense that I was like, well, it'd be nice to have that knowledge. And then White, because it's the only one, because they cheated and they know that it's the last episode, so they're able to actually go like, oh look, we're paying this thing off, we're paying this thing off, did make it enjoyable. But I did kind of feel resentment at like appreciating those moments, because I was like, yeah, but you cheated to give us this.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
What about you?
I think for me it was my kind of top choice was the pink episode as well. And I feel like this is because by this point I was like 7 episodes deep, and I feel like little to nothing had happened up until this point. Like, there was so much backstory that I generally didn't care about that much. And like you said, the prison one was good, but I think maybe I was like just pining for Orange is the New Black. Like, I could be watching that, but here we are.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It was by no means like the height of prison drama.
Yeah. But yeah, I feel like the pink one, after kind of watching those first few episodes where there wasn't a huge amount kind of like action wise going on, they packed a lot of action into that one, and it was almost like you said, like with everything else they've kind of done, almost like they'd gotten to the kind of after the heist and we're like, oh god, we need to really wrap this up quickly. Like,
yeah, bodies better start hitting the floor.
Yeah, and by that point I was so done that I was like, oh, thank god. Like, thank god this person's away and that person. But I do feel like the end of that episode was very like almost like gimmicky, like where you don't so you see Bob being shot down by several police officers on the beach. You see Ava and her pal or whoever she is get like
her mum, isn't
away.
it?
I don't know if it's her mum or like her nanny or something like that.
I mean, one of the many things about the show that we're unclear on.
So yeah, they're both dead, and then so you see them being killed, and then it's almost like it's like we care too much about Ray to watch him have to die, so we just see like this him in the underpass, because where else? And then like execution style back of the head. And when you watch the heist one, you discover who it is that's killed him. It's like his pal's son, who he's framed. I mean, he was involved, so it's weird to say that he was framed, but he's now in jail, so that son's obviously out for revenge. But if that was you and you were willing to murder someone for revenge, surely you would want them to know that it was you that had done it.
yeah, you probably would make a point of being like, yeah,
Yeah, and he was in no fit state to be fighting you off, so like it wasn't like fair enough if he was a big threat, you could go sneak up behind him.
That was the thing I thought was
in what was obviously like Central Park. Do you know what I mean? Like
that was the thing that kind of got me, was like they have that, you know, Ray and what's the other guy called? Roger. This is like fake name.
Sorry, just very quickly. When I first started watching it and I saw him, my heart dropped because all I could think about was that terrible M. Night Shyamalan film that he was in.
Which one?
I think it was called Age.
Oh, Old.
Oh,
I've not seen it.
But that's a story for a different podcast. But
basically, if he's in something, stay away.
Well, that was kind of, no joke. I was kind of like apprehensive the minute I saw him. I was like, oh.
That's good. That's good to know for future reference. I think I've seen him in something, but I don't know what. I need to look up his IMDb. But yeah, they have that conversation with like Ray and him, and you know, they basically, you know, they talk about the fact that obviously they've both been consumed by revenge, and you know, he's like, yeah, he's taken everything from him, but then Ray's got like, you know, he's obviously got like he's unwell, and his body's like falling apart, and I kind of appreciated, given the bloodbath of the episode, I kind of appreciated that they were like, okay, well that's, you know, they've made it so that his punishment is to survive and live with all the deaths and just deteriorate slowly. And then, yeah, when the guy just comes in, I was, oh no, okay, so they're not doing that. They're just going to have him get killed separately. I was like, what's that? Why do that? Like,
that's such a good point. It would have been so much more like subtle and nuanced for that to be, like you're saying, for that to be his punishment. He's brought all these people into the heist. Half of them are now all of them are dead now, except 2 people. And that should have been his like penance, but no. It's far more dramatic for him to be gunned down in the park.
Yeah, it just felt like that worked in terms of like giving a punchy-ish ending, but it didn't. It was less. I guess it was. I kind of thought when he was killed, I was like, oh, good for him. Like, you know, you're doing him a favor. Like, I don't think it would have been way sadder if he'd just been living.
That's so funny because when we were watching it, I had turned around at one point. I was like, if I was in that situation, you got none of the money you were meant to get. Your daughter you didn't speak to your daughter. Everyone you know is dead. Like, you're riddled with this horrible disease. Would you not just shoot yourself? Do you know what I mean? So, like, yeah, exactly what you said. Like, that was more of a blessing than a punishment for him.
He gets the only happy ending, basically, by accident. Also,
oh, sorry.
Even just that you mentioned, because he like FaceTimes his daughter, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like standing by, was it the Golden Gate Bridge?
Or the Manhattan Bridge, or
that's it. One of the famous American bridges. And I was just like, you not like super in hiding? Like,
yeah, exactly.
For all the crimes that you've done, and
yeah, because they'll have surely have come across the dead body in the dumpster. Like, he's got to be a suspect for that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, the FBI were aware of like the heist going on and stuff, weren't they? Like,
yeah.
You know, they were still trying to track down people involved. Surely they would have found some shred of evidence that he was alive, especially given they kept talking about the fact that they were like, everything seems to pivot around this guy, but I guess he is dead, so he must have just had
managed to break out of jail. How did he get into the back seat of that guy's car?
Oh, it's because he says he'd repair. I know this. This is because he says he'd repair the guy's window for him. So then he builds a secret compartment in the guy's car, and he unlocks it and climbs in, and then locks it again behind him.
Guess that. I do remember the guy's car being in the garage, and I must have just completely zoned out at that point, like, boring.
I just remember him saying to the guy, because they do the thing where they deliberately break the windshield, and I remember him making a point of being like, I could fix that for you, and I would do it free of charge because I owe you one. I remember thinking, I was like,
I'm in the jail and have no option but to not charge you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how would I charge you? How would that work?
Yeah, I did invoice you.
I did think that as well. I was like, could you have charged them if you wanted to? Are you in a position to do that? But yeah, that bit just kind of stuck out to me. Probably partly because of that, like the silliness of that line, and then when they explained the secret compartment, I made the connection. But it took, it just. Again, it's one of those shows that's almost like it's really hard to pay attention to it.
Yeah. Especially as well, that bit when he was like being birthed by the car seat really reminded me of that bit in It's Always Sunny when Danny DeVito is being like just coming out of that couch, and it's one of the most bizarre but hilarious moments ever. And I feel like this show, generally when I was watching it, I was like being reminded of like better shows. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it literally
never a good sign.
No, it very much is that, and it's because it does, it uses a lot of tropes and does like a heist and stuff like that. So it is constantly reminding you of like better shows, and even like Giancarlo Esposito, who's in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and is a phenomenal actor. Even him, like I just didn't really. There was something about his character and his performance that just kind of felt off to me. I don't know. I didn't really ever buy him as a character, and ever really. I didn't really care about any of them, to be honest.
No. I'm struggling to think of anyone. I feel like as well the characters didn't really care about each other either, because there was Stan, who I think it was his wife and his mum were literally like execution style shot in the head, and he'd never brought it up. Like I get that you're pining over this girl, but to the point where your family has been gunned down and you're like, okay. I think I'm more concerned about Shop.
I'll be honest. Yeah, exactly. Like it's nuts, isn't it?
So kind of following on from that tangent, what was your least favorite episodes?
Like all the rest of them, basically. Even because there was the purple one where it's like Ray's backstory, and they're like that one was like kind of maybe one of the more least interesting episodes. But even then, that's still just like it just had stuff like it kind of like things like him having the whole issue with like his race and the way that he's been treated. And I know that obviously it was like but like racism is still incredibly prevalent today. So it kind of felt like are you trying to make a point that racism's gone now by only having like the racist stuff happen in the past?
That was one of my issues with, because one of my choices was also that episode, and one of the issues again was that why wasn't that developed more? If you're gonna why did you just sprinkle it in there like it was no big thing, for it not to then for it to never be brought up in any other episode, for them to not even really go that in depth in that episode? Like, why did you bring that up?
Exactly. Yeah, it felt like a really lazy way of just giving him like some, problems, just generating conflict, with all the heist stuff, like to kind of include the wife and to make it like I thought the same thing. I was like, why not? If you're gonna do this, if you're gonna use this, if you're gonna have this like theme, if you're gonna comment on like racism and stuff, then like develop it. You take that somewhere.
In terms of when we watched that, like where that came in our kind of structure, that was that was like 5 or 6 episodes in by this point. Like that could have been handled like well before then throughout the thing. But again, it's that thing where it just seems like it was a kind of afterthought. Sorry, did you have any others that you wanted to mention other than that, than every other episode?
I like specifically, it is actually hard for me to like separate a lot of them in my head, because they just, which is again nuts considering that they were all took place in different times and stuff. But again, because I think because of the fact that I wasn't aware of like what the timeline was, it just made it really like hard for me to kind of track where everything was. And as a result, it just kind of like it makes it hard for me to now separate the events, because like I was, even when within the episode I was trying to remember or trying to figure out like if like things I'd seen had happened or if they'd yet to happen and what that would mean for what was going on now. But yeah, no, like pretty much all the rest of the episodes, I think there's one where like the FBI lady gets like extra focus. That wasn't needed. Well, I mean, it was in the sense that like, you should have the character developed a bit, but like once you see the episode, you're just like, okay, well, I needed that about as much as I thought I did, which is just not at all.
There was no point during the thing when I was like, what's going on with her? What's her backstory? Because she was very transparent about what her story was.
Wore her heart on her sleeve.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm with you there. Like, it just, and I think not having some episodes be like, oh, we're gonna give you this character's backstory, but then other episodes not do that.
Yeah.
Also made it really, again, it just didn't feel like there was a consistency to it. So it made it hard to separate the episodes, and it made it hard to kind of, if every episode had been like, okay, we're gonna give you this character's like backstory, then at least you'd be like, okay, well, I'm intrigued to watch the next one because I've not seen these characters' backstories.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel like you really got that, so that also made it hard to separate because you just have like the obvious ones that are like the backstory episodes and the after the heist episodes, and then all the other ones are just like, yeah, this happened before the heist.
Yeah, 100%. Some of the ones, like one of the ones that I wanted to bring up was the Red episode, which was the shortest one. It was only about half an hour.
Thank God.
But I feel like that was still half an hour too long for what they were doing. Like that was immediately after the heist, the morning after, and there was only like half of the heist people there. It wasn't like the poor guy that was the driver. No one even asked where he was, like, to my knowledge, to my recollection. Yeah, so it felt like the only good part of that episode was the moment where you discovered that the bonds weren't there, because there was a little bit of intrigue, like, ooh, where are they? Has someone who's not there double crossed them? But then, as I say, that was like a slight peak in interest.
Did you suss, by the way, because it's in that same episode, did you suss at all what had happened to the bonds?
No. I think partly because I didn't care.
See, I was making no effort to try and like figure out. I wasn't sitting there like, oh, who's got the bonds? What's going on with? But there's a bit at the end of that episode where the daughter, what's her name again?
Hannah.
Anna is talking to Roger. It is Roger Salas, isn't it?
Is it Roger? I thought his name was Graham.
Graham's his real name. Rogers is his fake name.
Right.
Yeah.
So between us, we've sussed it.
Yeah, go check us. Yeah, she's talking to him, and then she's like kind of going out the door, and then
the FedEx guy comes.
Yeah,
but that was even very obvious.
I think she even she's like, oh, on you go, like. I think she on you go Jim or something. Like she even uses his name, and I was like, okay, right, we know the bonds are missing, and they've just made a point of having this cat get acknowledged as he's pushing all these boxes, all these FedEx boxes out the building. I was like, he's 100% got the bonds, and I was just really surprised that reveal didn't come at the end of that episode. I was then really like, okay, that was weird. Why did they? And that was the only thing that made me think, oh, maybe he didn't because they didn't reveal it. And then in the last episode when it came up, I was like, oh yeah, duh, FedEx guy had the bonds.
FedEx guy, Pat or whatever his name was.
Yeah.
Yeah, a very good point. Another one we've mentioned obviously is the purple one, where I feel like they were just trying their absolute hardest to get this tragic backstory in, to inject some kind of I don't even know what some kind of storyline for you to care about the character, but I didn't feel any connection to the wife. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, no one wants to die in a fire.
Also,
but at the same time, I was like.
Also, the whole manufactured reason for her being there and caught up in it seemed so weird. Because she just gets a call in the middle of the night, and the guy's like, I need you right now, even though I've just fired you a few days ago. I've suddenly now realised at this big event that actually I need this paperwork doing. You have to come in right now and just do it for me. Yeah, why does that need to be done right there and then? And I love the fact that she leaves her infant child, wait here until the babysitter arrives. Yeah, exactly. And it was just seemed so strange. And again, I don't know how that could have. Why was he thinking about that at the party Why had he not thought about that before?
Yeah.
And it just that seemed like such a contrived reason to bring her into it.
And I love the terrible setup before where we've already seen her with her headphones on.
I was just gonna say they do the cliche thing of like having like oblivious character with loud music playing in headphones as if
So funny. I'm like, no matter how loud your music is, you're gonna be able to smell smoke. And it was already established that the fire that was lit was like adjacent to the room that she was in.
Yeah.
It was just like that weird kind of like bars between her and the fire. Like, you would have known. People have peripheral vision, do you know what I mean? Like,
also, like heat, you can feel heat.
exactly. Like, imagine being so engrossed in your paperwork that you think, oh god, it's getting warm in here. I won't bother looking up to see why.
I'm gonna ignore my senses completely and focus on the paperwork.
And then she was like trapped under a desk. Like, what were you doing, Hen? Why is the desk overturned?
Yeah, I know. How did things fall apart that quickly? And even just like the whole reason for like, if I had been, I don't know. I mean, I've been in that situation, but I didn't really buy into Ray's or Leo's complete and utter like lifelong hatred of Graham.
I'm low key with Graham on that one. Like, that
like
seems a bit dangerous for
exactly.
my wife.
Yeah, there's no guarantee. Like I thought maybe it would have been more the case that he was 100% responsible. You know, I thought maybe he would have lied about something or deceived them in some way or like double crossed them. But it's just a case of like, no, he didn't go in and try and rescue her. He just fled in a panic when the place was on fire and they'd just been, you know, the heist had gone awry. Like, to be honest, the guy panicked in the moment and I'm sure he felt bad about it. Like, it just, that seemed very, very like contrived. That whole like, now I'm going to spend the rest of my life dedicated to getting revenge on you.
And to ruining you,
Yeah, exactly. And I'd maybe thought at one point that they were going to do this clever thing where, you know, because he had this unrobbable vault, I thought at one point, I had this glimmer of hope that maybe it was actually going to be like a deliberate thing to draw Ray/Leo out. You know, because like how would he be able to resist that? You know, the unbreakable vault. And I thought, okay, that then gives it some emotional weight. Actually, it's not about the heist; it's about, you know, him drawing him out. And I thought that would have been a really interesting way for them to play it. Didn't do that, of course.
Of course, because that would have been too much thought.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we've kind of spoken about it before, but like in terms of the final episode, so the heist, how do you think it did with kind of like tying things up? Obviously there was some kind of like twists and turns, like the bees, for example. But yeah, how do you think it kind of handled what it was trying to achieve?
I thought it was fine. Like, you know, there were some nice moments that kind of landed. You know, there was a niceness to watching it because, like, for the first time, I felt like oriented. I felt like, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be, and now I actually know. I know as much as I possibly could going into this episode, and the show knows what I know. So yeah, that was kind of like that. It felt nice to actually be like on the same level as the show for the first time in 9 episodes. But yeah, like it wasn't the heist to end all heists. And there were some nice surprises again, like Judy being the one to like strangle Bob. Was like a cool reveal and stuff like that. Like it was quite nice seeing like, you know, having these questions answered. But yeah, overall, like I just still didn't. By that point, the show had lost me, and the sort of things it did do right, I appreciated, but it didn't redeem the show. It didn't make me go, okay, that was so worth watching everything out of order and just being like completely lost for 8 episodes. What about you?
I think pretty much same. Yeah, it was fine, like you said. I feel like there was moments that I didn't enjoy, like and it was purely because of that episode before where they did so badly with kind of creating any kind of emotion.
Yeah.
So, like the kind of moment where Ray and his daughter have that moment, I felt nothing.
Yeah.
Because I was like, okay.
Oh yeah, because they even have their big emotional. They.
Oh,
What,
they draw back to where you
and they show you flashbacks of every time they've done it in the series, as if you wouldn't just remember the thing that they've done multiple times already.
I thought about that earlier when you said that they don't trust the audience to remember things. They force fed you things in that episode, like, oh, remember, like, yes, I can remember things without being shown them again. So another one thing I did enjoy was there were, like you said, there were a couple of nice moments, like the moment where the elevator opens and it was Hannah standing there. That was a nice kind of moment where I was like, like it actually caught my attention. But again, I was disappointed because I thought initially that Leo had like double crossed them all.
Yeah, same.
Because he was ill, I thought he was going to use it for like his daughter. To kind of this idea of to kind of like give her the life that he couldn't give her before, but no, that wasn't the case. That was ruined yet again. And the worst part was that she was stealing it to give it back to the triplets.
Yeah.
So there was no like these triplets were set up as these weird like caricaturish villains, and they get their way. They get everything they want. They get all their money back. They get money from insurance.
Yeah, they win, but they also, like, considering that they're the only ones that, like, actually seem to have, like, them and the daughter are the only ones that really have, like, happy endings, also felt like they had just, like, so little screen time, and, yeah, it was just really a really weird choice. Like, I just, when that reveal happened, I was kind of like, good for them. Like, I don't really know them, but, like, I'm happy for them.
And Hannah made the point, like, oh, rich getting richer. I'm like, yeah, you're making them richer. Like...
Yeah, and everyone ends up dying anyway. So like, they could have just taken the money. Like.
Yeah, exactly. Because she says herself they would have got a payout from insurance anyway, so they don't need all that extra money. You and your sister just take it and bolt.
Exactly.
And there was a moment as well when it was first revealed that she had stolen the bonds. Sorry, I did think back to the Pink episode where when he has the phone call with her, she's in this just magnificent giant big house on this cliff top.
Yeah, that was absolutely
never explained how she can afford that. Do you know what I mean? She must have stolen. Her sister must have stolen some of the bonds.
I think did she say something about getting a cut or getting some money because I don't remember. I don't.
Exactly.
I think she got some money from it because they didn't even get all their bonds back because obviously they had a couple of the bonds. Yeah. On top of the thing, but yeah, like
and that's that thing where no one, like, part of the fun of like a heist story is that the people who are committing the heist are in theory bad guys. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're criminals, and historically you're kind of taught not to root for them. But part of the fun of heist movies is that you are rooting for these people and you want them to win.
Exactly, it's like an anti-hero story.
Yeah, but in this, like, they didn't win. Half of them are dead, and it was like the actual kind of like bad guys, like the money launderers and things, that won. Like,
it literally just felt like the message of the show was, don't like mess with the rich. But rather than you could have had that. You can have that message. You can have that message that's really bleak, like the rich. Are only there's definitely like a social message that you can make there, where you're commenting on the fact that like the rich kind of are untouchable and they only get like more and more
White
powerful.
Lotus. That is a lot of the premise of White Lotus, but they do it in such a beautiful nuanced way that makes watching Kaleidoscope even worse. Do you know?
But also but that it didn't feel like that was like the social point that Kaleidoscope was trying to make. It didn't feel like. And again, you maybe could have, rather than having like the whole like racist issue in the Purple episode, you could have had it maybe be like more of a class thing, and again, because you do have like the rich being snobby and entitled and all these things, but maybe make it clearer, like the rich were coming out on top then, and they're still coming up on top now, and make it more of like a class thing that you're make it clear the point that you're making. Don't just again just have this. It felt like just another like social point that the show made, but just wanted to make in like one sentence rather than actually developing it at all.
Yeah, much like all the other points of the show. But yeah, I feel like generally the heist episode was fun enough to watch, do you know what I mean? But yeah, I feel like you're saying, I feel like it wasn't so good that it made having to watch the rest of it worth it. Which I feel like it should have been. It should have been easily the best episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it just wasn't. So yeah, I'm glad we had the same opinions on it. I had no doubts that we would when I was watching it.
Same, to be fair.
Yeah. But yeah, as always, Sam, thank you for joining me. It was a good discussion.
Not at all.
Despite us just slating it, those are sometimes the most fun.
Yeah, I think it's quite nice when it's. I think this was it was an interesting. I was looking forward to talking about it because it is an interesting one. Like again, there's some really good ideas, so it makes for an interesting discussion because it's not just a show that was very, because the issue with like something like this where it's just a very vanilla show is you then don't really have anything to discuss, but because there are good ideas in there, it then makes for a good discussion. So thank you for picking it. It was a nice experiment.
Yeah. So yeah, in next episode will be episode 24, which is the last episode of season 2. So that'll be our final concept episode for the season, and I'll be hosting that one again, joined as always by Sam. So yeah, we will see you then, and yeah, I would be interested to see if anyone has watched Kaleidoscope, if they made a note of their order of what it was, just out of interest.
How many people got the same order as us?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, as always, Sam, thank you for joining me, and we'll see you guys soon. See ya.
Farewell.